Hello, this is Lady B, and this week I am making ginger chicken soup. This is my own recipe, and it's something that I've been craving this last week as my entire family has come down with the stomach flu. And you may have noticed I didn't have a video last week, that's why. This recipe is one I invented, however, created years ago when both my sister and I were still living at home with my parents, and she was getting sick often. And she needed something that was both easy on the stomach, delicious, but very nutritious also. Something to keep her strength up when she was ill. And it has become the go-to recipe in my family for stomach flus, regular flus, colds, anytime somebody's under the weather and they're having trouble and they just don't want to eat the usual things. So it's a very, I think it's a very easy recipe. It takes a little time, but it is so worth it. Now, when I say it takes time, it doesn't take a lot of work. It just, there's some prep that goes into it. Now, I have pre-prepared my ingredients here. I have 8 cups of water in my pot here. I'm using my Instant Pot as a replacement for a stove. I like to joke that if you have an Instant Pot, you actually don't need a regular kitchen. They're wonderful. I have here 2 cups of chicken. Now, this chicken was cut up into small pieces, trimming off any fat, any connective tissue, anything. So all that's left is just these bite-sized pieces of chicken breast that has then been soaked in water from a half hour to 2 hours. I'm not sure exactly how long I did it, but it was longer than that. Well, longer than a half hour. And you soak it and then you rinse it. And then it's ready to be used. And the reason for that is that we want to get as many of the impurities out as possible, because those are things that when someone's sick, sometimes it's hard for them on their stomach. You don't want it in the soup. I have some pre-cooked rice back here that you can't see. I have a bowl. Let me show you. I have some pre-cooked rice. I have 6 cups of pre-cooked rice, which is how much this particular recipe calls for. I have here 2 tablespoons of miso. Now, if you've never used miso before, it's a fermented soybean product. So if you are allergic to soy, obviously do not use this. But as a fermented product, when treated correctly, it can really help with the digestion, which is something when you get sick can be very difficult for you. So this is something that will really help with that. It also, I find, works really great as a flavor enhancer. It lets us make a soup without broths. This will actually not have any broth in it. I know it doesn't sound like it would be good, but it really is. I'm going to set this aside though, because I will be using that later. And then my other ingredients are, I have a 1.5 tablespoons of minced garlic. I have 2 tablespoons of grated ginger here. Now you could mince it or you can grate it. If you haven't ever grated ginger before, I recommend, now you can buy ginger from the store that has already been grated in little squeezy bottles, and I love those. But fresh is always best, especially when you're dealing with sickness and things. The key is, with ginger, is when you're dealing with fresh ginger, you peel it by using just a spoon, just a teaspoon, and you just rub the edge along the ginger, and it just takes the skin right off. And then you can either use a really fine grater, or you can buy one of these. And this isn't clean because I've just used it, but they're these little ginger graters you can pick up, and they're really not very expensive. And they have this raised surface in the middle. And what that does is it lets you rub your ginger on it, and it separates out the pulp, leaving behind the fibers. And it's that pulp we want. We don't really want the fibers. Again, remember, we're trying to go for really easy to digest, easy on the stomach. So these are wonderful. If you don't have one, I suggest picking one up. And the last ingredient is chopped dates. We want a little sweetness in the soup, but I don't want to use like processed sugars in any way, shape, or form. So I just throw in some dates. And as these cook, they'll put the sweetness in. They'll also give you some of that nutrition from the fruit, but it's a really gentle sweetness. It's easy to digest. It makes the whole thing just taste so much better. So now I need to put all these ingredients, the chicken, there we go, my dates, my garlic, and my ginger goes in my pot. And now I'm just going to bring this to a simmer, and I'm just going to simmer it for half an hour. Since I'm using an Instant Pot, that means I use the saute setting on. I want to bring it up to heat on normal, which was the equivalent of medium, or 350 on a stove. And then once it comes to a boil, I'll switch this to my low setting. So if you're doing it on the stove, start on medium, bring it up to a simmer, and then turn it down and keep it simmering low 1/2 hour. And I'll see you then. It has finished simmering for half an hour, and I now have a really light broth from the chicken cooking in the water, which is what I was going for. And the color, let me see if I can move it where you can see. The color is a slightly light brown because of the dates. And because I completely trimmed the chicken, there's almost no fat on this whatsoever. So again, when people are sick, sometimes they can't handle fat. So that's really good for that. Now, to finish the soup off, now I'm going to use my miso. So if you have never used miso before, you can't just plop it in. You'll end up with this big lump. So the secret is to take about 1/2 cup of your broth from whatever you're going to add it to, and I mix that in to the broth first. If I mix it into a smaller amount, it will dissolve quite nicely. And I'll just mix that. This is kind of like making a slurry for making gravy. If you're making a flour gravy, you'll take a little bit of water and mix it with your flour first, and then add it back into whatever it is you want to thicken with the flour. It's very similar to that, except I'm starting from a paste. And I'm just mixing it until it is no longer Now, the color this is going to be is going to depend on the type of miso you use. Miso comes in basically 3 types. You have your Shiro Miso, or your white miso, which is made with soybeans and rice. You have red misos, which sometimes are straight soybeans, sometimes they'll have wheat in them. And then you have the ones that are a mix of the two, or have other things in it. And this is a mixed one, which is why it's the color it is. Usually when I do this, I just use the straight white miso, but I ran out, so I'm using my mixed one. And there, that's what it's supposed to look like. So you can see how it's just now the color of that miso. And that's completely mixed in, and I'm going to put this in. Now, the reason I didn't put this in before I cooked it is because we want these active enzymes from the fermented product in the soup. And if you boil it, you can kill some of them. This way, it being hot's okay, but hot for a long period of time, not so much. So this way we've kept them alive, and we just add it at the very end. Oh, it looks like I missed just a little bit. So I've got some little chunks there. So I'll grab a little more. And I'll do it again. And just squish it until they're broken down. There we go. All right. I mix that in. And that's finished. So now to serve it. Now, my rice. I made this ahead of time because I was going to be cooking it all in the one pot. But you can instead cook the rice while this is simmering and get it all finished at one time. So here's my bowl, and I have a couple crackers, and I'm going to put a half a cup of rice in. This is kind of sticky rice. A long grain rice works well too. Just use a white rice. Brown rice is a little harder to digest. Normally I am all for brown rice, but in this case, use white. So I have about a half a cup in there now. And then I add my soup. And there we are. My ginger chicken soup for days when you're feeling under the weather and need something that's easy to eat and delicious, but easy on the stomach. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week, where I'm going to be doing a little sewing. Until then, whether making soup for a sick family member or yourself, or whatever cooking you may be doing for yourself, don't be afraid to suit yourself and make whatever you do exclusively you.